We're going to get going.
Okay. Welcome to recording and identifying nocturnal flight calls. I have been listening to and recording night migration formally for the past 10 years. There has been an uptake in the monitoring of night migration in the last couple of years due to COVID. We're all birding closer to home, and for some, nocturnal migration recording filled that sense of adventure and anticipation that we yearn for when chasing birds in the field. I was no different. In the spring, I took a deep dive. We've been recording nonstop since April at my house here in Peterborough, Ontario. For those interested in getting started, there is a lot of information on the web in blogs and forums. There is a great website called oldbird.org, created by Bill Evans, the recognized pioneer of nocturnal flight calls in North America. But even with all these resources, it took me a lot of trial and error to arrive at a process that works for me. This presentation is meant to help those interested in getting started, consolidate and simplify the wealth of information on the internet, and inspire people to try it out. So I'm going to focus on the technical aspects of recording and reviewing nocturnal flight calls. In late April, Mike Burrell gave a well-received OFO Zoom seminar on nocturnal migration radar. This is meant to build upon that seminar and provide some tips and advice to help those who might be interested in recording and identifying calls. Now, I'm not an audiophile, nor am I a bird call identification expert. But as I mentioned, through trial and error, I have arrived at a process that works for me, and that's what I'm here to talk about. I hope the advice and some of the examples I can provide will pique your curiosity and provide a starting point for those interested in recording nocturnal flight calls. And finally, I recommend listening to the presentation with headphones. I have some audio examples. I've tried to pick the best ones, but due to the nature of flight calls, they can be pretty quiet. And I am slightly concerned you might not hear any of them if I'm not sharing my audio properly. So if someone could just jump in if the first time I play a call and no one hears it, I think there's probably a setting I can toggle in the background. We had it working earlier, so hopefully we're good to go. So I'm going to assume that many of us attended Mike's Zoom presentation this spring and understand the majority of songbirds in North America migrate at night. And that many of these songbirds use nocturnal flight calls, some distinctive, some not so distinctive, to communicate with one another while navigating in the dark. In general, these birds migrate in a broad front across continental North America. Yes, there are flyways where migration can be concentrated, but in general, migration is taking place across the continent in huge numbers. I'm not going to go into radar, but here we have a composite radar image of a big migration night. The bright green circles represent many, many, many birds aloft above the radar stations. As you can see, intense migration is taking place up and down the eastern United States. On a peak migration night, thousands of birds will fly over your house. The take home here, looking at the radar, is anybody's house is a perfect location for recording flight calls. You don't have to live at Long Point or Point Pelee to record birds migrating at night. In fact, cities and towns can be great places to record nocturnal flight calls. It is believed that when confronted with bright lights and tall buildings, migrant birds can get disoriented and as a result call more frequently. Cities are noisy places, but most human noise is at a low frequency, while most songbirds call at a higher frequency. So regardless if a bus is going by, neighbor's air conditioning is running, or a dog is barking, you can generally still hear the faint chips of birds overhead. When you look at a spectrogram, which is a graphical representation of the call, you might be pleasantly surprised by the resolution these calls provide. And then finally, directional microphones can help isolate sounds overhead. and reduce lateral sounds, improving the listening experience. So here's our first technical hurdle of the presentation. I'm going to see if this works. I'm going to try playing this spotted Sandpiper. This was flying over my house on July 16th. My air conditioner is running, and the air conditioner is about 20 to 30 feet away from the microphone. So I'm hoping you realize that, or it'll be apparent that you can still pick up and hear birds, even with all the noise that's in our nightscape. So please jump in if that's not coming across. Like I said, you will hear more if you do have your headphones plugged in. And I have a few of that spread throughout the presentation. Did you get it?
Everyone's hearing it just fine.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, that's from my air conditioner, which is right next to my microphone. So, so with all this noise, we can still record birds. Before we jump into discussion on hardware and methods, what do birds flying at night sound like, and what sort of birds call at night? So here are a few examples. Hopefully I don't have too many and won't bore you with them, but first we have a Swainson's thrush recorded at 4:21 a.m. on June 1st. So that's one of my better calls. That's a beauty. They aren't all that clear. Swainson's thrush is your prototypical nocturnal migrant. Many of you will be familiar with hearing their peep note overhead on a cool September evening. They are vocal and they are relatively abundant in the nightscape. So next we have a white-throated sparrow recorded July 27th. Much higher pitched, a little quieter too. White-throated sparrows make a high, long, sibilant seep note. Many of you will be familiar with these calls, as this is one of the calls they frequently use in the bushes around your feeders in the spring and the fall. It's not just songbirds that call while migrating at night. Shorebirds call while flying at night. Here we have an upland sandpiper reported at 10:15 on June 17th. In the business, they call that knock-mig gold. That's not a bird that normally flies over my house, so I'm quite excited to hear that one. Record that one, I should say. I did not hear it. Herons are quite vocal at night. This is a least bittern recorded in the early hours of June 4th. It turns out, this was a surprise to me, least bittern is actually a very active caller, heard frequently in the early summer. Rails are also quite vocal while flying at night. This one was reported June 12th. And it's not just calls. Many birds sing in migration. Scarlet Tanager is a classic example of this. This one's tougher to hear. It's a little quieter. And the frogs are in the background right at the same frequency as the call. You can see in the spectrogram, there's these burry notes. And I will play it. You gotta listen a little more carefully on this one. So just one phrase of song while flying overhead. So, as these birds are going over at night, while we're all tucked up in bed, how do we get from them calling while we sleep to these identifiable sound bites? And all that's required is a microphone, a recorder, and a power source. In the beginning, I started out just pointing my voice recorder, the one that I would carry in my pocket while birding during the day at the night sky. I then moved to a small directional Rode microphone that I plugged into my iPhone. I tried building a parabolic mic, didn't work out so well. And now I use a shotgun mic, as seen in this picture in the middle of the bucket. The big take-home message is they all worked. They all got calls. Some a little better than others, but they all worked. Earlier, I mentioned that a directional microphone pointed straight up is the best approach, and they will produce the best results. A directional mic will reduce the ambient insect and man-made noise while focusing on the sounds overhead. Voice recorders work. Some of them may have directionality built into their onboard mics. So that's one thing to note if you have a voice recorder. Your options for a directional mic, moving from least popular to most popular, are a shotgun microphone, parabolic microphone, and finally a pressure zone microphone. So starting with the least popular, we have the shotgun microphone. This is the microphone you typically see in like a TV interview. It uses a long tube with slits on the side to block out sound waves from the side. They are very directional, perhaps too directional. They don't amplify the calls. They reduce all the peripheral noise, making the sound directly in front of the mic stand out. So at the top left there, we have a typical shotgun mic, very similar to the one I use. And then in the bottom, we have a small mic that attaches to an iPhone. This is one I had that I used on my iPhone. I've since misplaced it. It was very useful. But yeah, like I said, my current setup is similar to the top one. Next, we have parabolic microphones. These are very popular in Europe for, as they call it over there, knock-mig. With a parabola, multiple sound waves are reflected off the dish to the microphone at the center, and if it is set up properly, the sound waves are actually amplified. They are very directional, but also, like the shotgun microphone, perhaps too directional. And finally, we have the pressure zone microphone. These microphones are similar to those found in conference rooms. They use a solid boundary like a conference table to focus and amplify the sound waves. Don't ask me for the physics behind this. A lot of the technology is beyond me. This microphone is directional as well, but my impression is that it can cover a broader swath of the sky than the previous two microphones, and perhaps results in the detection of more birds. Bill Evans, the previously mentioned pioneer of monitoring night migration, the one I mentioned in the intro, he creates and sells these for a very reasonable cost for parts, basically. He set up a nonprofit organization, and there's a website with a link I provided there, worldbird.org, where you can find out more about these microphones that he tailors specifically to capture nocturnal flight calls. He also has some instructions on there for building your own microphone. If you're the adventurous DIY type, I tried that. I think I cheaped out on some of the components and it wasn't great. I would suggest that this is probably the most popular microphone used for nocturnal flight call recording in North America, and they seem to be the ones that those doing research use. A smart place for anyone to start is to get a voice recorder, especially if it's one of these voice recorders that has some directionality built into it. The other thing to mention, like in this picture, if you see on the bottom, this voice recorder has an XLR input, which means if you ever wanted to upgrade your microphone, you could plug in your XLR cable and just simply use this as the recorder, not as the microphone. You could plug it into an external microphone, I think is what I'm trying to say. But the point about voice recorders that I really want to make is, regardless of the microphone you use, you're going to need a device to record the sound. Even if you plan to save cost and record to your computer, like I did, you may need to buy a preamp to power your microphone, so at the end of the day, you're not going to save much money recording directly to your computer. and your computer might not be available at night when you want to look at the calls you've recorded. So the recorder above will take an SD card, and if you plug it into a mic, it will act as the preamp and power that microphone. I'm not recommending my setup. In hindsight, I think there are far better options out there, but I was going to show you all the components. I was going to go back on video and plug them all in just so you see all the components, but my video isn't working, so I'm going to have to talk you through this page. I use a Synco hypercardioid shotgun condenser mic. It's in that bucket pointing straight up. The bucket is supposed to reduce local ground level noise. I'm not sure how effective it is at that, and the mic is directional. I'm not sure how much that matters. More importantly, the bucket keeps the mic pointed upright, and it can be easily covered if there is wet weather in the forecast. I have a large roll of saran wrap, the stuff that you use, the wide stuff you use for packing and moving, and I'll just roll it over top of the bucket. And if it's going to rain, and you still get calls, even though there's saran wrap over top of the bucket, you still get your calls. So right now I'm connecting the mic to a Zoom podcast recorder through an XLR cable. The Zoom podcast recorder is plugged into the wall. Some people use power packs. Mine's plugged into the wall, and the recorder has a record 16-bit wave, has an SD card, and it powers my microphone. The microphone doesn't have a battery. It powers through the cable, and the recorder functions as the preamp. And you set this up as high as you can. Lots of people put these on towers or roofs. You want to get up above the trees so you don't have wind noise and insect noise. I set mine up every day, so I don't have it on my roof. It's a little lower, but my deck's pretty high. But as you can see, there's trees in the background. So I try to get it up as high as I can. And like I said, you can record directly to a computer. I was earlier this year, and I had to run my microphone through a preamp before going to the computer. And then I recorded using Audacity, free audio software to record, and I'll talk more about that later because that is also used for reviewing calls. So in order to get the sound quality required to view and identify bird calls, it's recommended that you record in 16-bit WAV file. And you use a sampling rate of 44 kilohertz. That'll be more than sufficient to record calls up to and slightly above 10 kilohertz. You're not going to get many birds up above that, at least not flight call wise. Every recorder I have seen, including iPhone, can record this format, but you should double check before purchasing a recorder that it will meet these requirements. And then this requires a bit of trial and error. You'll have to adjust the gain settings to find an optimum setting for your mic. Basically, you go as high as you can before you start to clip and distort your loud calls. I try to find a balance where the background noise isn't too loud. I just don't really want to listen to 8 hours of car engines and static. Sometimes less is more when it comes to gain, but you'll have to fiddle and experiment with your mic to figure out what the best gain setting is. So I thought it would be worthwhile to demonstrate how good a simple voice recorder can be. On the 13th, I recorded with my regular shotgun mic and with the Zoom H2. I chose the Zoom H2 because it's the microphone recommended for the breeding bird atlas. I was able to borrow one for a few nights. I tried to set the gain on the Zoom H2 as close as I could to mine in order to achieve a similar level of background noise. As expected, the shotgun mic did have clearer returns. It also had better resolution when zooming on the Spectrogram, but as I hope to show you, the Zoom H2 produced good workable results. So in the top, we have my mic, and we have 2 calls. The first call is a little Z call from a warbler, and then we have a black and white warbler. And you can see in the bottom that those 2 signatures were picked up. And then if you look over to the right, and I have my Zoom box in the way, just a second. That's the first call. That's the first Z call. It's a 3-humped short warbler call, and you can tell in the top one on mine, it's not that great. It's a partial call and slightly less resolution with the Zoom H2, but you can still kind of make out that it's a 3-humped Zoom call. So a few more voice recordings, a few more examples from that voice recorder from the same night. And the Zoom H2 certainly produces identifiable recordings. We have a presumed Cape May warbler on the left. It's high, it has small modulations, short, kind of from downward arch. We have a chestnut-sided warbler on the right, lower frequency, long and buzzy, and definitely identifiable using the Zoom. Well, that's it for hardware. Now on to software. The center of all nocturnal flight call identification is the spectrogram. Spectrogram is a graphical representation of sound. Our ears and our brains aren't able to distinguish between most nocturnal flight calls. These calls are too short for us to make sense of. With training, yes, we can train our ears to recognize some of this variation, but by and large, we'll use a spectrogram to help us identify a call. It's also faster to quickly pan through and tag a spectrogram versus listening to an entire 8-hour evening of recordings. So a spectrogram plots sound frequency on the y-axis versus time frequency on the x-axis. Volume is represented by how dark the color is. In this example, we see a dark low buzz between 0 and 1 kilohertz. This is mostly traffic noise. It'll always be there in your recordings. And around 4 kilohertz, you can see these 3 little dark patches. Those are chirps from a cricket. And then we have this rising double-banded modulated call. It is roughly 65 milliseconds long. That's a presumed morning warbler, so I'll play that. Pretty boring to listen to, but quite exciting and nice to look at in the spectrogram. So we put our mic out in a bucket as high as we can and record it in WAV format. And in the morning we pop out our SD card, and what do? I use Audacity. It's free and open source software, and I use it for playback, listen, and to review my recordings. It can also be used to record, as I mentioned earlier. Some people use Raven to review spectrograms, and there is a Raven Lite version that's free, but it seems Audacity is more popular. And I'll give a demo in a bit. Bill Evans, once again, his name comes up. Like I said, he's the pioneer. He's created auto detection software. He did this about 20 years ago. They're available for free at the oldbird.org website. They take a bit of setting up. You have a bit of computer knowledge to set them up, not too much, but it can be done. He created a thrush detector designed to capture short bursts of energy in the 2.5 to 5 kilohertz range. This is good for picking out thrushes, grosbeaks, and bobbling. It doesn't identify the calls, it just sort of puts them out for you. And he created a seep detector designed to capture warblers and sparrows, giving short bursts of energy in the 6 to 10 kilohertz range. These programs can be run automatically to extract the calls, and then you toggle through them and quickly classify an especially designed tool using hotkeys to assign species to the clips. I don't use them. By their nature, they can't pick up weak calls because they would pick up every cricket chirp. Not sure if that's such a big deal. They certainly work for the research community and have a track record of detecting thousands of birds. My main reason for not using them is because I like to be able to manipulate the spectrogram, clip out different lengths of calls, and tally up birds calling multiple times. And for me, this is easier to do manually in Audacity. If you go on the Nocturnal Flight Call Facebook group, you'll find many people who prefer to go through their recordings manually. So it takes me around an hour to go through a quiet 8-hour night. about 4 to 5 hours to go through a busy night, and it remains to be seen how long it will take me to go through a night in the first few weeks of September. Hopefully, I could be going through those recordings in November, because that would mean quite busy. Identification is largely based on the pioneering work of Bill Evans and Michael O'Brien, published in their 2002 CD-ROM Flight Calls of Migratory Birds. It's available for free now online at Bill's website. There are a number of other online resources that I use to help with bird identification. I've provided some links there. And other birds use calls at night that you recognize from the day. I didn't intend to dive deep into identification. Like I said earlier, I'm not an expert. It's probably worth a whole session on its own. But I've provided a quick overview of some of the main classes of birds. So we'll start with sparrows. They're generally the highest pitched. They do overlap with warblers in frequency, but they tend to be higher pitched. They also overlap with warbler calls in length, but they tend to be longer calls, approaching or greater than 100 milliseconds long. And so these examples are mainly designed to show the purpose of the spectrogram. They're not going to sound much different to the ear, but they look quite different on the spectrogram. So you have a Savannah Sparrow, which usually has this, it starts steep and flattens out. It has this double-banded look. And then we have a chipping sparrow, which typically has this bucket-like shape. So as I mentioned, warblers are generally a touch shorter and lower frequency than sparrows. There are two groups that are currently thought to be unidentifiable to species with any confidence. There's the double-banded upsweep group that includes Nashville, Tennessee, black-throated green, and orange-crowned warbler, and the buzzy-sounding zeep group that contains yellow, magnolia, blackburnian, blackpoll, cerulean. If you do listen to these, you should be able to hear that the second call, the zeep call, is coarser and buzzier. So we'll start with the double-banded upsweep. And then the zeep. If you listen carefully to the zeep, you can almost hear the three peaks. Thrushes call between the 2 and the 5 kilohertz range, much lower and longer than sparrows. They're in the bottom of the spectrogram. Bobolink, Scarlet Tanager, and rose-breasted grosbeak share this part of the spectrogram. I find rose-breasted grosbeak infuriatingly challenging for me. There's a wide variety of calls that approach many of the thrush calls. So many of these calls end up in the passerine species bucket when I classify them. Here we have a veery. And then I was hoping to do a demo, so I think you're gonna have to, if you don't mind, bear with me, because I'm gonna try to switch to Audacity. I don't know how to do that. Should I stop sharing? Sorry, I'm gonna share again. Okay, so we've recorded a wave on an SD card or directly to the computer. We've copied that file over to the computer. We have Audacity open. This is the open source software I was recommending for file review. And so we open that file up. So we'll open and we're going to take this first one. So this is from August 20th, 3:14 a.m. It's about 5, you can see the time on the top, it's about 5.5 minutes long. So when the file comes into your viewer, it comes in waveform. First thing we have to do is switch it to Spectrogram. And there we go. Next step I do is I add a label track to the bottom. Just a second. Adjust these windows. Try to adjust these windows to maximize the size for the spectrogram. I've removed all the extraneous menu items because we want as much of the screen for the spectrogram as possible. We have, as I discussed earlier, we have traffic noise down low, we have insects and amphibians, and they tend to be in this continuous band throughout the evening that run across the graph. So I have preset zoom keys that I use to jump in and out. So to start with, if I zoom to normal, this is the scale that I would pan through a busy night. It's about 10 to 15 seconds long, and I just page, and anytime I see a call, I'll zoom to it to identify it. If it's a bit quieter in the middle of summer, I may set my paging to 30 seconds at a time, just so I can get through it faster. But right now I have it set to, there's a lot of insect noise right now. I'm running about 15 seconds a page. And I've set my zoom preset. I have a key to, just one key to zoom in. And it's set based on, so I mentioned that this, that the Flight Calls of Migratory Birds is freely available online. So this is that website. And here there's a species index with all examples of all the calls. So we just open up a Warbler one. I set my zoom to be a similar zoom to this so that I can quickly get a good visual comparison of them.
Ian?
Oh, you don't see that, do you?
We're not seeing the screen.
Yes.
We're just seeing the gray background.
Yeah, so...
It's a pop-up window, right?
You see my screen now?
We're seeing your screen, but we're not seeing... should we be seeing a spectrograph at all right now?
Yeah.
We're not seeing anything. We're just seeing the gray background.
Okay, I'll share. Bear with me. So first I'll share this. So this is the website. I'll go back. You guys obviously missed it. So this is the 2002 Flight Calls of Migratory Birds, online, freely available. There's a species index with all the species listed. And if I open up one of these species, you'll see a spectrogram. You can also listen. And so I've set up my zoom in Audacity to be a similar scale of this, so I can easily make those comparisons. So now I guess I got to go back. To Audacity. And you see my recording now?
Yes.
Okay, so then I start just panning through. So immediately, second screen in, we've got a call. By design, one would think. So using just one key, I could zoom in. And the first thing you'll notice is that it's blurry. It doesn't look good. So this, when I figured this out, it was a game changer. I would look at this and I would think my microphone was terrible, and just, you know, either drop it or try to get a new microphone, or just, when I realized that it was simply settings in the spectrogram, it was a bit of a game changer for me. So by changing the window size here and going with these settings, it all of a sudden becomes much sharper. And I'll just keep those settings the way I have all night long, and I don't have to change any settings. And that's a good, good settings to see these calls at this scale. So that's a Canada Warbler. It's quite distinctive. It's a known early migrant, and yeah, we can listen to it. We go out and we select the diff. listen to it. I haven't altered it, so it's pretty quiet. I can export that if I want to save that and post it to eBird. I'll just go export selected audio. I was going to jump back and forth and show you what that looks like on the Old Bird site. I don't know if that makes sense. Well, maybe I can do it. So we're back in Old Bird. I'm assuming you guys can see this.
Yes.
And then so Canada Warbler. There you go. He's got more examples here. And you can so one of the few ones you might be able to pick out by ear. So back to the spectrogram, and we just sorry, got to label it. So just with one keystroke, I can decide to label it, and just put in the bird code. And then what I'm going to do at the end of the night is I will export my labels. I'll have this full of labels for the whole night, and I'll export it. I can bring it into Excel, and then I can sort it in Excel and tally up all the totals. So we just continue panning, and we're looking for anything that's a little bit unusual. These are all insects chirping. You zoom in, doesn't look like much, but when something new comes along, you go backwards, you move forwards. Something new comes along, there's a little nick there that's a little bit different. You zoom in, and you can see 3-humped Zeep call, like the one I played earlier in the presentation. I know those are unidentifiable, so I just move on as quick as I can, because hopefully there's 100 more of these to go through. Here's a little darker mark. That's presumably a chestnut-sided warbler. It's got way more humps, and it's way more, and they're tighter. There's less space between the humps. It's pretty typical chestnut-sided warbler, I think. A lot of these are presumed identifications. There's a little nick. That is a American redstart. Label it, and we can jump back over to here and show you what an American redstart looks like. So American redstart has a pretty distinctive signature. And we keep on going. Just jump in if I'm out of sync and you guys aren't seeing what you're supposed to be seeing. So I'm back in my spectrogram, just going through. We're almost halfway through. We've got a couple of other little marks in here. Not really sure what that is. I'm not going to dwell on it. It's probably a Cape May warbler, but it looks a little long, a few too many humps, so we'll just call it a warbler for now. Same thing with that. That might be a Cape May too, but it kind of looks a bit like a Zeep call, so we'll just call that a warbler as well. I tend not to dwell on them. I'm not sure. Another little mark. So that's a Zeep call with 2 humps. If you're more adventurous, you may try to identify, pick out bay-breasted warbler. There was a paper written a few years ago identifying the Zeep warblers. And bay-breasted was one of the ones they claimed could be identified with some level of confidence. So if it has 2 or 3 peaks and there's greater than 20 milliseconds between peaks, it's probably a bay-breasted warbler. They tend to have this sort of squat, flattened appearance. And so we can measure that by just doing a selection. And down on the bottom, under length and end of selection, you can see it's 26. So it might be a bay-breasted warbler. For sake of this presentation, we'll just be safe. We'll call it Zeep and move on. And then I'll tally up my Zeeps, and they'll just get added to my warbler tally. And we have something again. So this is great. That's the exact same call again, maybe 20 seconds later, 15, 20 seconds later. So what I do with these is I put a little 2 on the end of them. And then in Excel, when I sort them alphabetically, anything with a 2 I'm considering to be the same bird calling twice. So I just won't count it in my tally. And we keep going. And here we have, I think this is Savannah Sparrow. I'm not really sure, so we'll just call it a sparrow. Savannah Sparrows typically start steeper. This seems like a partial call. It might also be perhaps a field sparrow. They have a descending flight call as well, so we'll just go with sparrow. And keep on moving through. Oh, and finally there's a good one. So zoom to that one. That one's quite distinctive. It's a beauty. It's a white-throated sparrow flying in mid-August. So we'll label that as white-throated sparrow. And if I jump back to old bird, and we go and look at white-throated sparrow. So we're in the wood warblers, and we go to sparrows. And you typically have this long, they're really quite long. They descend at the start, they're double banded, and then they have this modulation at the end that gives them that sibilant quality. So here's a whole bunch of examples. And so we zoom back out and we keep going. And here we have my air conditioner kicking in. Not ideal, but sometimes you just got to keep the family happy. There's one. Keep, move on. It's different and it's too far from the last one to be a duplicate call, so that'll be a fresh Z. Then we're done. And we'll go back to the presentation. I've got to find out which slide I was on. Sorry, bear with me. So after identifying and tallying all the calls, I report them to eBird. There was other databases out there. I can't really speak to them. Don't want my eBird account to be revoked. So I use eBird, and I have a dedicated Nocturnal flight call account. I have a dedicated account because I'm not listening live, and this really isn't meant to be my personal list. There's a different level of error associated with this type of birding. Some identifications, many identifications are presumed, and I'm using eBird protocols. And so using those nocturnal protocols and having a dedicated Nocturnal flight call account allows other users and scientists to query out my data in the future if they want to totally ignore it, or if they want to use it to look at nocturnal data. I love the recent strides eBird and Macaulay Library have made with media. So I load as many examples as I can into eBird, and it can function as a good call repository or database to help you with identification. So I'll give you a quick demonstration of that. If I click on open up eBird, and I gotta share eBird somewhere here. Is it? There it is. So this is my eBird account, and this is my media account. And so we look at some of those examples that we had in that recording we just went through. So white-throated sparrow, you can see all my media I've loaded up. So some of these I question immediately. These ones don't have much modulation. Wondering if they were a different species, but there's probably a reason why I put them in. Just can't think of it right now. Look at Savannah Sparrow. So typically they start a little steeper. So that's why I was reluctant to call it a Savannah Sparrow. This one here, maybe a close example. You can look at Canada Warbler. And here are all my Canada warblers. So I love this about eBird. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be uploading spectrograms as pictures in Macaulay, but the scale of their playback on them, I like to have a picture so I can get a quick reference of if the call looks the same or not. You don't really necessarily see that in the out of the box spectrograms they provide. So let's hop back over to the presentation. Sorry, I've lost my cursor. Here is it. So as I mentioned, I've only been documenting and reporting my evenings since the end of April, but I'm already learning so much that I didn't learn before. Some of the stuff I've been hearing has been really cool and eye-opening. I'm going to finish off the presentation by highlighting some of the stuff that I find cool. So the first topic is fall migration. It's well underway, as I'm sure many of you are aware. So here's a thrush descent from August 16th at 5:21. They're almost all veery. I had very few thrushes that night, maybe 4 or 5. But given the number in descent, the birds must have been either not calling or too high to detect. So I'd heard thrush descents in September, but I hadn't really, I can't remember hearing one with so many birds in, I think there may only be 3 or 4 birds there calling multiple times, but I can't really remember hearing one in August, and that's August 16th. So I'm going to share another page. So I've summarized my numbers, and here we're looking at nightly totals for white-throated sparrow. We'll move that to Warbler Species. And so here are Warbler Species, which are mostly zeep calls and upsweeps, double-banded upsweeps and zeep calls. And you'll see that they start early July. I think we know that yellow warbler starts to move pretty early, late July, and you can see that reflected here, presumably, with the warbler species increasing in July. But what really caught me off guard was start of August and how they just seem to go through the roof compared to May, my May numbers. And I think they say that fall, there's way more birds moving in fall, but I didn't realize it was this many or to this extent. And you'll also see these numbers reflected in my Canada warbler numbers. So there's Canada warbler, way more. I'm detecting way more in August than I did in May. And the other one I was going to show was chestnut-sided. Chestnut-sided warbler. Same thing. So yes, migration is well underway, and August is clearly one of the busiest months. Sorry, I'm moving my cursor when I jump back and forth. Cuckoos. I kind of had an inkling to this before from doing owl surveys in midsummer, but cuckoos love to fly around and call in June and July. So first we have a black-billed cuckoo chortle on June 17th. And then we have a yellow-billed call from May 20th. It's hard to hear. You might need your earphones for this one. Maybe I shouldn't have included that, but I have a soft spot for yellow-billed cuckoos. And I've also included one singing just for poops and laughs. So if we jump back over to the numbers and we look at black-billed cuckoo, you see that migration starts and there's some decent numbers in mid-May onwards, but they don't really slow down through June and July. They just kept going, kept coming all summer long. I certainly didn't know this when I started, but marsh birds and grasshopper sparrow are very vocal and active at night. Yard listers, take note. I think you could sit outside on a good early May migration night and likely net Sora, Virginia rail, and least bittern in a couple hours. And if you were lucky, maybe common gallinule. I had no clue. Sora, least bittern, and Virginia rail seem to go for every night in May and June. So I've already played you Virginia rail and least bittern. Here is Sora. It's a really good call, really loud. And then a fair bit rare, but still a marsh bird that I wasn't really expecting to hear, common gallinule. And if we flip back over, so here I have all my numbers tallied up, and if we scroll down, it goes from going from my biggest to the least ones I've detected. So Warbler Species is clearly the front runner right now. But if we scroll down, we see all the Grasshopper Sparrows, and I was not expecting this. Up until a few weeks ago, before the Warblers started picking up, Grasshopper Sparrow was my 6th most identified species, which I kind of find shocking. And then if we scroll down, we see 117 Virginia rails for 2 months. They were nightly. And then for 2 months, not quite as much, but almost nightly, we had Sora and least bittern 44 and 43, and totally blew my mind how many of them are flying around. And so finally, Sparrow Movement. I always thought sparrows were late migrants, showing up late September and moving in October, and I'm surprised to be detecting sparrows from late July through August. Is it post-breeding dispersal, is it migration, or is it something else? And so I'll share some sparrow graphs just for curiosity. So let's start with Grasshopper Sparrow. I get so many of them. And you can see another hump picking up. So what is this? Is this just post-breeding dispersal? Are there more around in the fields? You know, they're not flying that far. There's more around the fields than I know about, perhaps. Chipping sparrow mimic that a little less, maybe a little less vocal at night. There's a lot of chipping sparrows around. They nest in my yard. But you see this noticeable hump starting in late July. Savannah Sparrow, also similar, but a little later. So here we have Savannah Sparrow just picking up now. And even something like white-throated sparrow, and maybe it's because there's not many in my immediate surroundings, but white-throated sparrow with just a few here and there, no more than one really per night, and then a few without. So not to the same intensity, but maybe there's just not as many in my immediate surroundings. And so I think that is pretty much it. Let's jump back to my presentation one last time. Sorry for that. It must be annoying. Finally, I'm leaving you with this link. There's a gentleman on Nocturnal Flight Call Facebook group who's consolidated a whole bunch of useful web content in a Google Doc, and almost everything you need to know about nocturnal flight calls in that link. And thank you very much. It's been a fun ride, and thank you for letting me share it with you guys. Any questions?
Thanks, Ian. We're going to put it out for questions. Just so you know, we have a little bit of a lag, so it may take a couple seconds before people start putting their questions in.
Do I jump off of this? What's the best?
You can stay on just the way you are, and I'll get the questions for you as they come in. So I know some people had some questions, and they were asking about when to post. So we'll just give them a couple more seconds, and we'll see what comes up in the chat here. Very interesting. I tempted to set something up on my balcony, because I'm at about the tops of the tree level, so it might be a neat spot to try and do one as well.
I highly recommend it.
All right.
There's a whole world above us that just.
All right. So questions. Starting to get some questions rolling in. Adam's asking, how long does it take you to manually go through the calls from a busy night?
So a busy night is about 4 to 5 hours. And that is, I think my busiest night is around 800 birds so far. More calls, but 800 birds. I'm a little worried about September. Maybe it won't be any different. But, I may get a night or two in September that just paralyzes me.
Yeah, I think we've all had those days and nights during migration, right? I know there's been days where the migration has paralyzed us during the day, so I'm sure same would be at night. I was contemplating shutting down in the middle of summer. I mean, it's just there's so much interesting stuff. I just kept going, but the stuff in the middle of summer didn't take that long because I was scrolling through, with more 30 seconds at a time, and I could get through the entire night in about an hour. What really bogs you down is when you get something you can't identify, right? And
then you start going down the Google wormhole, rabbit hole, and you could be there an hour later and you haven't moved an inch. And then you find out it's like it's possibly a red-eyed vireo singing or something like that.
Someone was asking, they're curious as to how they narrowed down these calls to the species level in the first place. And so...
Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure. There's some papers written on it. I think a lot of the work they did, they recorded birds during the day and flying during the day, and then extrapolated to the night, and then verified it with banding numbers and stuff like that. Some of the calls they really haven't recorded during the day, and some of them are kind of, I think they just might be kind of inferred from filling in the gaps. Mm-hmm. Things like least barren maybe, or some of the calls that are quite rare during the day. But they've sat at places like Cape May during migration and recorded birds as they fly over, and to create databases of what these things sound like in flight.
Excellent. Someone wants to know, in general, what can we expect to hear over the next couple of weeks?
Well, I think all warblers are fair game, and the thrushes should definitely start to pick up. I'll already see Swainson thrushes and Veery, hearing them definitely in the morning descent, and they'll just get stronger and stronger as you get into mid-September.
Yeah. Someone also wants to know, have you used this technology to record diurnal migrants like finches, etc.?
I have not. I've contemplated running it in the morning. I'm having my coffee on the deck, and that's a great idea. I don't know where I'd find the time to go through it all. They do get some diurnal migrants at night too, so I'm always hoping to pick them up at night. I had in May red-breasted nuthatch. I'm not sure if that's a diurnal migrant, but definitely not one you typically think of as a nocturnal flight caller. And people talk about getting things like pine siskins and evening grosbeaks at night as well. So I'm hoping to pick up some finches at nighttime.
Cool. Someone wants to know where you live that you would get so many marsh birds like least bittern. I think they're jealous.
Yeah, so I think one of the points I wanted to make is in Peterborough we have a lot of wetlands, and they could just be birds flying from a kilometer away. And so I think the habitat around here probably contributes to all those birds I'm getting in June and July. But I think the May numbers, you could extrapolate those May migration numbers across all of Ontario, I'm guessing, and least bittern has to fly over downtown Toronto just as much as it has to fly over Peterborough, and they'll be calling on the way. So I think the May numbers you should experience everywhere, but some of that movement in June and July, like the cuckoos and the Virginia rails and the least bitterns, they may be a little more local.
Excellent. All right. I've got another question here. Just had a question about more calls in the fall rather than the spring. I am assuming that the number of migrants would be similar, same birds leave and return. So what's the difference in the amount? They're wondering. I think it's young of the year, so you have to remember that they all bred through the summer, so there's a lot more birds migrating south in the fall because the young of the year are migrating as well.
I think that's part of it. I think the rest would just be pure speculation on my part. I think sometimes it might be thought that the spring migrants go a little farther, go a little higher. Maybe they're just not getting detected. I know from birding personally, I had a Philadelphia vireo in the yard today, and that's not a bird I typically get in the yard in the spring, but then I might have 4 or 5 or 6 in the yard in the fall. So I was just thinking about that and trying to reflect upon my night numbers, and I realized that sometimes there's some birds that I do see 5 to 10 times more in the fall than during the spring. Lincoln sparrow is another example that I hardly ever see around Peterborough in the spring, but usually you see a few in the fall. So
and if you look at some of those animated eBird maps, you'll see that there are some species that have very different migratory routes, spring versus fall. So where they come up one way, and then like black-polled warbler is one that always comes to mind to me. So that could also help explain part of it too. But there's just in general more birds migrating during fall migration because you have the young birds of the year. So that's the kind of the small thing, and then there's all the other factors that contribute to that. All right, I'm just going to put it out there and see if anyone has any additional questions. Haven't seen anything else rolling in yet. So before we wrap it up for the night. And if you're able to, Ian, can you send me the link for the bibliography and I'll post that in the discussion on the presentation.
Sure. Do you want the whole presentation? I'll send you that link.
Yeah, just if you can send me the link that's on your last slide. I put the other website in there, but I just, because it's a hyperlink. If you can send that to me at some point, I'll make sure it gets uploaded into there. So if anyone's wondering and you want to rewatch this, you can watch this again here on Facebook, and in a couple days we'll have it up on our YouTube page as well, and we'll make sure that all the resources are linked. All right. Well, it doesn't look like we have any additional questions, so I would like to just take this time here to thank you, Ian, for coming out tonight and doing the presentation for us. We really appreciate it. I think a lot of people are going to be now starting to look at buying microphones and getting buckets from Home Depot and setting up our own recording stations all over Ontario. I think it'd be really interesting to get more people doing this and just contributing to the knowledge base about what's going on at night, because obviously a lot is happening. So thank you very much for coming out today.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. If you have any additional questions, you can stick them into the comments and we'll make sure they get answered. And we're going to log off for the evening. So thank you so much for joining us. Our AGM for Ontario Field Ornithologists is coming up in September. Stay tuned for more information about that. And we will be looking at additional webinar presentations coming in the next few months. So if you have anything that you would like to learn more about, let us know and we'll try and find someone to talk on that subject. So thanks everyone for coming, and good night. All right, we are done.